Everyone, Pastor Nathan here. Today we've got something a little bit different for our noon devotion. We've been talking about praying the Psalms, but today we're going to do an interview with Reverend David Johnson. He is over the music ministries at Epiphany Lutheran Church, formerly of Concordia Publishing House and of Concordia Seminary, and he has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the Psalms. Their use in corporate worship, their use historically, and their use today. So we're going to take some time and learn from him as he talks about how we have used the Psalms and how we are using the Psalms together as God's people. So hope you enjoy. We're glad to have you with us, David, as we spend time talking about the Psalms. We've been in the recent weeks talking about praying the Psalms and how these have impacted the life of God's people as a kind of a platform to express our concerns, fears, worries, frustrations, joys, challenges to God when perhaps we don't have the words that we want. Today we're going to take a little bit different tack because of the pre-conversation we had. I'm kind of excited about the many rabbit trails we might get lost down as we discuss the Psalms from the perspective of the worship life of the church. Before we do that, though, I do want to ask, what's your favorite Psalm and why?
Well, my favorite Psalm is very Lutheran. It is Psalm 46. And the reason it is that is because my confirmation is the first verse. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of trouble.
Okay.
So, and then we have the phrase, be still and know that I am God.
Right.
Okay? So as we articulate that psalm personally as a young man or a young boy, really at confirmation age, my whole experience with that psalm has developed in an extraordinary way. We sing that psalm. We sing a lot of psalms in our hymns, in our lives, in our spiritual life, to the tune Ein feste Burg, a mighty fortress is our God. And as life unfolds with roaring waters and raging nations, and calamities beyond our ability to cope, as you know, years and years ago, I was divorced, and the pain and the calamity and the isolation that causes with your children, with everything that you stood in life, and your association and relationship and opportunity in church life just blows apart. It's like you're incubated by yourself, and then as you are singing a translation, a little bit loose, Good's fain child and wife, let all these be gone, and they were.
Yeah.
So there you have the reality that it's a corporate hymn for the corporate life of the congregation. But at that moment, it really hit hard because everything was coming to, the world was raging, just as it is now, in different ways. Yeah. And also in the way that I have dealt with Psalms throughout my life as publisher or pastor, musician, there's this tension about them, because are they contemporary? Are they chanted? Are they this? Are they actually? There are prayers that span everyone's heart and mind and theology, and you put all that together. And so, we think about a mighty fortress is our God, and we think about the music side of that. Roaring brass, strings, great organ choirs, and whatnot. Yeah. And so when I was doing a recording, and understanding the background and the history of Psalms, particularly of Psalm 46, when you really delve into it, you realize that Luther created that hymn in the confines and the intimacy of his own home. And that hymn was accompanied by no other instrument at first other than lute, which is the predecessor, of course, of the guitar.
Right.
So in essence, when I study the hymns and the corporate nature and the pietistic individual part of the Psalms, I'm like, in life it all comes together. I'm not sure that Luther ever thought of it as being so enormous as we now interpret it in musical terms and musical expressions. It was simply done on a lute to accompany his family.
And that gets to the point of one of the challenges with the Psalms is that they are corporate. We know this from some of the textual notes that we have, throughout the Psalms, and we know this also from this historical data of how they're used. So they're corporate, but they're also intensely that personal, as you said, that personal pietistic. How does this apply to me and affect my own individual walk with Christ? And both of those interpretations kind of, have a tension there.
They absolutely do. In the history of psalmody, it goes back to the temple in Jerusalem. Yeah. Actually, psalm singing wasn't as prevalent in the early Christian church or in the synagogue worship. The prescribed psalms were used in the temple to express the theology of Yahweh and his presence in the midst of his people, with psalms of lament and thanksgiving and praise and royal occasions. So the psalms are things that we pray that contribute to understanding the redemption narrative. Mm-hmm. And when you think about psalm singing together, that really didn't come about until about the 4th century with monastic orders, and they had their daily offices and prayers. Still, it was not largely done in corporate worship life. Not until the Reformation, when we have Ein feste Burg, a mighty fortress is our God, when metrical hymns started to being the conduit through which we deliver those texts for the corporate body, whether you're talking Lutheran, whether you're talking Genevan Psalter, you're talking the Anglican Church or whatnot. And over the centuries, it kind of escalates. We're going to do it corporately. Then we're going to do it individualistically. And it wasn't until the 1950s, after the Second Vatican Council, that we see an escalation of the corporate singing of psalms, when we have psalm tones that are assigned, and the way the psalms are sung are particularly pointed out and prescribed. That's because we corporately, you want everyone to confess the psalms. Right. At the same time, there are many psalms of personal, praise, personal thanksgiving, and so there's that ownership that people want to have because they have a love for the psalms, and we have the ability to, sometimes memorize those more than other parts of Scripture. Yeah, that's because they're kind of poetic. They're designed in couplets in 2 lines, so you have the ability to think about them. You have the ability to grasp a hold of them and sing them, whether you're chanting them, whether they're in the context of a hymn or in the context of a contemporary song. So the Psalms it sounds like the Psalms have a kind of a rocky history, not in the sense that they are not a firm foundation for our faith, but they just have a kind of a meandering history, or a century by century history with the church. Like, how do we use this? How do we not use this? Is this more individual? Is it more corporate? Is it more, are we praying it more? Are we singing it more? There's a lot of sort of give and take between the centuries in terms of how the Psalms are used. How do you see the Psalms being used, like, today? I mean, I guess the end of the 20th century and into the 21st century as the church. How do we use them today? In essence, I do not think that the design of the Psalms in and of themselves, they're used the same way in this century as they have been in the past, regardless of how you sing them or how you share them,
Okay.
because it is based on prayer.
Hmm.
And if you think about prayer as being corporate or individual, it's still, we are called to be prayers of the word. And the
Hmm.
Psalms give us that first hymn book that provide the language that touches our hearts and our minds, whether you're singing it in a hymn or a contemporary song. And truly, Psalms, in terms of corporate worship life, um, they are still the kind of formulate and shape the prayers of the church.
Yeah.
We have psalms that are appointed for each day that can be sung or spoken responsively. The psalms also become um, uh, part of that entrance rite with the introit. There's
Mhm.
a proclamation, it is a prayer, an invitation of saying, here we're going to go, and this is part of our redemption narrative. Um, I think it's very, very important that regardless of how you express the Psalms, they continue to articulate our Christian faith, articulate our ritualistic practice as worshiping Christians, whether you are in um, whether you're in a contemporary setting or a traditional or blended setting. The Psalms will always find their way and are woven into the hymns,
Yeah.
into the Psalms, into the Psalms. We in Ephesians and Colossians, we're talking about hymns, songs, and spiritual songs.
Yeah.
It's a complete repertoire
Mhm.
that the church experiences throughout the centuries, and that repertoire changes constantly through hymns and songs. In the song industry, there's over 5,000 to 8,000 songs written every single year
Oh,
to shape
jeez.
um, that repertoire.
Yeah.
Uh, hymnals are generated probably once a generation,
Mhm.
about every 20 to 40 years, depending on supplements. It's all over the place. And I think what we need to do as Christians is to embrace the entire story and
Mhm.
understand that the gospel is woven in and through all of the repertoire. And we just need to be good stewards of cherry picking those things that are good for the heart of the whole people or the heart of the individual, and embrace it all.
I love that. I love what you said earlier. This idea of the Psalms are. I'm paraphrasing because I can't quite remember, but basically the Psalms are always kind of influencing the worship life of the church. Their presence is going to be found, um, and in a different ways in different generations. We'll see them differently, and we'll have different. Will perhaps be influenced from a different batch of psalms or a different kind of context, if you will, but they're always there influencing our worship.
Because when the language of the psalm is delivered in diverse styles or whatnot, it's still the language of the psalms, which means it is the truth of talking about Yahweh, talking about Yahweh's intervention with Israel, foreshadowing the redemption story of Jesus, putting a doxology on a confession that it's gospel based and always based in the story of God. I would always like to uh, uh, believe that what's important is that you learn to sing a song, hymn, psalm, or whatever that somebody else loves, and that your love for that person surpasses any discomfort or saying, well, I don't like that particular expression, or it's inappropriate, because there is someone that has the love of Jesus in their hearts and is embraced by that very same gospel that likes to sing something different than you do.
Yeah, right, right.
I tell you what, we could go for, I'm looking at the time. We could go for a lot longer. We have right here on this, because this has just been a great conversation, but I appreciate your time, David, as we spend time going through the Psalms and just looking at it briefly. This is so brief, y'all. A brief history of how the church has used the Psalms, how the Psalms have been used throughout history, but also then just a great look at how the Psalms are used today and how we can use them as a way to love our neighbors as ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Good
thank
point.
you, David, so much. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk soon.